As we all know, education is a key to opening opportunities for our people, which we have no doubt about. And many of us have been working at this for many years, some of us a little longer than others, but we know, reflecting, that we have made tremendous progress and we have a lot more room for such progress to take place. We know that there is a strong relationship between educational attainment and employment, income, and broader opportunities in life. While we have, as I mentioned, made significant strides in increasing educational attainment levels, we still have too many youth who have not completed high school and too many high school graduates who do not go on to or complete post-secondary education. Our Métis governments are committed to changing this situation, but face many challenges and barriers along the way. The Métis National Council General Assembly, over the years, has committed itself to the concept of lifelong learning, knowing full well that it is a complex subject that covers a wide spectrum of activity. This commitment starts with early childhood development to ensure that our children entering school are ready and able to learn. It extends to K-12 schooling and the need to support our children to stay in and succeed in primary and secondary school so that they can proceed to post-secondary education. It then extends to post-secondary education, including university, colleges, and technical and apprenticeship training to ensure that our people can access professions and vocations of their choosing. And even beyond that, it extends to ongoing education and skills development to ensure that our people can access learning supports to compete in the Canadian labor market. Our governing members have made great efforts to fulfill the needs of our people in all phases of this lifelong learning continuum, but the barriers have been and continue to remain formidable. The foremost barrier we have faced is that of jurisdiction. As you all know, we are part of the provincial education system, but that system has not addressed our distinct needs and rights, including the right to a culturally supportive education. The federal government has, until the recent Daniels decision, insisted that we are a provincial responsibility, especially when it comes to matters like education and health. And I just pause at this moment to say, while we affirm that the federal government has the jurisdiction to enter into relations with our nation on a government-to-government basis, a nation-to-nation basis, actually, we say we're responsible for ourselves. We just want to ensure that that jurisdiction enables our governments to engage with us so we can exercise our responsibility. When pressed, the government would argue that it was providing indirect support to Métis through its fiscal transfers to the provinces under the Canada Social Transfer System payments. Under this system, payments are made by the federal government to the provinces for post-secondary education, early childhood development, social assistance, and social services. The Canadian Social Transfer is a block fund that provinces are free to spend in these areas largely as they deem fit. Few, if any, provinces use these resources for programming targeted at our people. Moreover, our Métis governments were disregarded as possible partners in delivery to improve the lives of our people. Despite the failure of both the federal and provincial governments to address our needs and rights, our governing members and Métis communities have struggled to carve out a space for the Métis Nation in this complex system. Our Métis Nation education institutes, Louis Riel Institute in Manitoba, Gabriel Dumont Institute in Saskatchewan, and Rupert's Land Institute in Alberta, have taken on a vast range of responsibilities to address the needs for Métis in a culturally supportive education effort in all areas of lifelong learning. Their work on training teachers, developing curriculum, and resources for K-12, adult upgrading, and education and training at post-secondary levels is truly remarkable in the face of their chronic lack of funding or underfunding. Our governing members were able to negotiate a clause in their assets agreements which enabled them, after their targets were met, to use funds for Métis Nation endowments that have been created on a matching dollar-for-dollar basis with post-secondary institutions. The investment income that has been generated by these endowment funds has provided thousands of Métis students with bursaries and scholarships. Since our students are excluded from the post-secondary financial support that the Federal Indigenous Services Department provides First Nations and Inuit, this financial assistance has been important. At the same time, many applicants are turned away, and the bursaries themselves, unfortunately, are insufficient, but I'm sure very welcomed by those that do receive them. The Kelowna Accord, which was negotiated with the Paul Martin government in 2005, included a commitment to a $50 million investment in our endowment funds, as well as support for the expansion of our Métis Nation education institutes and the establishment of a Center of Excellence on Education. Of course, as we all know too well, those promises fell by the wayside with the election of the Harper government. The election of the Trudeau government in 2015 breathed new life into the commitments made in Kelowna. During the federal election campaign, the Trudeau Liberals committed to honor the Kelowna commitment to expand Métis Nation scholarships and bursaries. At a meeting with the leadership of the Métis Nation, First Nations, and Inuit in Ottawa on December 15, 2016, Prime Minister Trudeau announced the establishment of a permanent bilateral mechanism with the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis Nation. He characterized this new mechanism as Kelowna-like process, in which every year he would meet with each of the three people's leadership to develop policy on shared priorities and monitor progress going forward. Similar meetings with cabinet ministers would take place at least twice each year. Our first meeting of the Métis Nation with the Prime Minister under the Permanent Bilateral Mechanism occurred on April 13th last year and concluded with the signing of the Canada-Métis Nation Accord by the Prime Minister and the Presidents of the Métis National Council and governing members. The Accord establishes that early learning and childcare, as well as education, would be first-year priorities. Under the early learning and childcare section of the Accord, we worked with the federal government on a Métis Nation specific component of an Indigenous early learning and childcare framework. Our proposal calls for an investment of $60 million per year over 10 years to support the creation of 2,500 spaces for our children in Métis Nation early learning centers and more than 3,100 child care spaces. Okay, that was what we asked. The federal cabinet will soon be meeting to approve the Indigenous early learning and child care framework, which will include a Métis Nation component, and we are expecting a significant investment for this. The education component or section of the Accord commits Canada and the Métis Nation to co-develop and negotiate policy in 3 areas. The first is supports for Métis Nation students, K-12, to improve their educational outcomes. The second covers post-secondary financial assistance to enhance Métis Nation students' access to post-secondary education. And the third covers support for expanding the capacity of existing Métis Nation post-secondary institutes, such as the Gabriel Dumont Institute, Louis Liel Institute, and Rupert's Land Institute, and exploring the need for additional institutions. Yesterday, the Métis Nation leadership met for the second time since our summit with the Prime Minister, with multiple federal ministers to review progress on priorities under the Canada-Métis Nation Accord and to discuss how to implement recent allocations for the Métis Nation in Budget 2018. One of these allocations is a $10 million investment in our Métis Nation endowments for fiscal year 2018-2019. President Chartier, Métis Nation Minister of Social Development, will provide a recap of yesterday's discussions on education. We view the $10 million for the endowments as a first step in acting on the Kelowna commitment. However, there is still much work to be done on securing sufficient and ongoing financial assistance to enhance Métis Nation students' access to post-secondary education. As well, Budget 2018 did not include support for the expansion of our educational institutes, nor did it provide resourcing to improve educational outcomes for Métis Nation students in the K-12 system. In view of this unfinished business, education continues as a second-year priority under the Accord. This conference is being held to help us focus on determining what the objectives for our work on education should be this year based on the needs and priorities of the governing members. Today, we are hoping the governing members can provide us with a snapshot of where they are engaged in the lifelong learning continuum, and what their primary needs and priorities are going forward. Later in the day, we will hear from Métis Nation educational institutes on these matters. Tomorrow morning, we will zero in on early learning because, as I mentioned, this is an area where we anticipate significant resourcing and the need to get up, for us, to get up to speed quickly in our planning. After hearing from a senior official from ESDC on the Indigenous Early Learning Framework that Cabinet is expected to approve shortly, we will hear from our Métis Nation specialists working in early learning resource development and early learning education training. We will conclude the morning with a senior official from Indigenous Services Canada presenting on the federal post-secondary education review. This review will be important as we have been given assurance that it will address our needs for ongoing post-secondary financial support in a Métis Nation housing strategy over 10 years in budget 2018 and an expected significant investment in Métis Nation early learning in an upcoming Cabinet decision. Likewise, I believe we can make similar progress on post-secondary support if we are able to carve out a Métis Nation specific component of this federal review. Tomorrow at lunch, Minister Philpott from Indigenous Services Canada will be joining us, and we expect her to speak on the budget and the next phase of work under the Accord on education. After lunch, we will focus on our going forward strategy, where we hope to pull together what we heard from the governing members into recommendations for moving ahead on education under the Accord. The governing members will also inform us of other avenues they are pursuing to move ahead on education priorities, including their Section 35 tables. The Métis Nation is definitely moving in the right direction with the Trudeau government, so let's make this conference count. Merci.